everyone, and welcome to East-West Wednesdays. Thank you so much for joining us this week. My name is Snehal Desai, and I'm the producing artistic director. This week's East-West Wednesday is brought to you by our partner, Comcast NBC Universal. And we have a great program tonight. We will have our first Clopening ever, which stands for closing and opening. There are many shows this past February, March, April that didn't get to get to be recognized publicly or have audiences see them, but all of the work was put in terms of rehearsals and tech time. So we wanted to take this opportunity to reach out to many of those companies and directors and designers and bring them on and have them share what their work was and their process. This week we also have three of my favorite playwrights, Lauren Yee, Leah Nanako Winkler, and Susan Stanton joining us. And they will talk about what they have been up to and where they are in this pandemic. So thank you again so much for joining us. Welcome everyone to our second East-West Wednesdays. My name is Snehal Desai. I am the artistic director of East-West Players, and we have a great show for you tonight. We will be talking to the amazing API playwrights, Lauren Yee, Lena Nanako Winkler, and Susan Stanton in the second half. But the first half we're actually going to dedicate to a new series called Clopenings, which is about those shows that, due to the pandemic, unfortunately opened and closed before they were able to be publicly seen or have a regular run. So today our first opening is for the production of JEAN COCTEAU'S Orphée, who's on the call, who knows how to pronounce it. Right, we'll say JEAN COCTEAU'S Orphée, that was being produced by Deaf West Theater, and it was being directed by Deena Selenow. So Deena, many of you know, directed Kentucky at East-West Players. We also had Howard Ho, who did sound, and Howard you will know from dozens and dozens of East-West Players shows, and also for being Lin-Manuel Miranda's best friend, apparently, on Twitter. We also have Lena Sands. Lena is also is the costume designer for that show and has costume designed. You did Kentucky for us. Did you do something else before then? And so we had done a couple of.
After I did Next to Normal.
Excellent. So Lena, who did Kentucky and Next to Normal for us. And then we have some new artists joining us. So let me start with James. Welcome,
Hello.
James. And what was your role on the production?
I was the set designer.
You were the set designer. Excellent. And then we have Buck.
Hello, I was the lighting designer.
Welcome. Excellent. And then we have Michael.
Yeah, I did all the video projection design for the show.
Excellent. Thank you. And we want to also recognize our interpreter, Carrie. So we wanted to make sure that this particular opening specifically was also made accessible to everyone. Great, so I'm just gonna launch into things. So Deena, why don't you, kind of let us know first a little bit about the show, how you got involved with it, and then what your Clopening experience was, if you will.
I also have to attribute Clopening to everyone. Everyone in the cast was using it. First of all, thank you for inviting us here, and also I'm feeling very emotional for real seeing all of you guys here. The last time we saw each other was the last day we were allowed to see people. So you're literally the last people I saw other than my husband and child and my cats. So, yay. So how did this start? So DJ Kurz, who's the artistic director of Deaf West, reached out to me in, I think about November, and he and I had kind of met on the theater conference circuit over the last few years, and he was saying, let's collaborate on something. I have a slot, and we don't have a play. And I went, oh, okay. So we started brainstorming and realizing that both of us were really interested in bold visual narratives and stories that weren't always driven by the literal or driven by a verbal English narrative. And so we started saying, okay, well, what does that mean? And also to put into the mix is that this was for an LA run that would be followed by a weekend run in Tokyo as part of the True Colors Theater Festival that was part of the Japanese government's cultural programming leading up to the Olympics. So it was very exciting, all of this. So we looked through a lot of shows. We actually got the rights to a show at one point. We're like, it doesn't feel right. So eventually I sent him a copy of Orphée by JEAN COCTEAU'S, and I was like, oh, he's going to hate this. But he wrote back and he really loved it. And Orphée is Cocteau's 1926 adaptation of the Orpheus and Eurydice myth. And, but surreal and strange, and not taking it literally, but setting it actually in kind of like a domestic countryside setting in France/Thrace. And then we took it in the next step into our own world. But yeah, that's how it came about. He wrote me back and went, "This is strangely contemporary. Let's do it." And then we went from there.
Great. I'm wondering if you could, for folks who don't know, just give a little bit of what the Orpheus Eurydice myth was and why it felt contemporary.
So the myth itself, and mind you, I haven't talked about this show in like 2 months. So the myth itself is Orpheus, who I think is like half god or something, or part god. His wife Eurydice dies. In the myth, I think she's bitten by something, by like a snake or something, and goes down to the underworld, and then he has to go on a journey to get her. He bargains with Death. Death is like, okay, you can have her back, but as you exit the underworld, she'll be following you. You can't turn around. If you turn around, she'll disappear. Kind of like Alcestis is kind of based on this also. So then, lo and behold, right as they're about to go through, he looks back and she's gone forever. And so that's a nutshell of the myth. And so, but Orphée, it actually starts out with Orpheus and Eurydice, a married couple in like a domestic setting, arguing, and they're arguing over Orphée's horse, who starts the play off communicating to him via Morse code. And so he and the horse is feeding him information via Morse code to create a new poem that will rock the world. And so already it starts off and you're like, what is happening? But it's really a domestic story. And then that feels very familiar in terms of like partnership. And then as it goes, we realize Orphée is really just kind of obsessed with his work and with his art, which is also familiar, and how that affects their domestic life. Eurydice ends up getting taken by Death, goes to the underworld. He goes to find her. We don't see what happens. He comes back, and then hilarity ensues, and essentially they now have to grapple with kind of the same issues they had before.
Great. So, I would love to hear, James, you got this play, which has a horse that communicates via Morse code. And oftentimes, set designers are the first ones we engage in the process as directors. So I'm not sure if that's the way it happened, but, let's talk about, James, what happened when you read the play, or if this was already something you were familiar with, and also if, how you and Michael, if this was your first time working together, if you worked together in the past, and how you were aligning scenic and projection.
Well, when it comes to the projection, I think because we knew right from the beginning this was going to be a Deaf West production, that no matter, at the very minimal, there'll be some kind of subtitles and projections, especially reading the play. It's more than just the talking horse. The play goes in a lot of different directions.
Great. And I know you have some visuals, so feel free, Deena, if you want to throw up some of the inspiration you guys have, or some of the early renderings. And so, Michael, I would love to bring you into the conversation. What were your thoughts as you read the play? And before I do that, actually, can you talk about the space that this happened in? So it was Inner City Arts, correct?
No. It was, what was that place called?
Totally.
We didn't, when we first started, we didn't know exactly where it was going to be. There were several theaters that were in the mix. So we were kind of designing we knew it was going to be a black box space, and we knew in the nature of signing that it kind of needed to be proscenium, but that's the only thing we really knew for certain. And we kind of were just designing without a space in mind for a while, actually. for at
Yeah,
least a
quite.
month and a half, 2 months, something like that.
Yeah, I think we were a couple weeks out of rehearsal when we confirmed with Theater 3 at the Odyssey,
Yeah, that's right.
actually. And what I can do, so that was also interesting. Yeah, kind of designing for a space. We didn't know, but DJ, our artistic director, said from the beginning that proscenium, in his experience, would be best. And so I can show you some images. So do you want to just kind of talk through this a little bit, James, as I scroll, or do you want to explain?
Sure. This is this is kind of a little more close to these are illustrations that we developed into once we knew the space and once we were trying to figure out. There's a lot of, tricks in the show that we're really trying to figure out. And one of the biggest things is this kind of going back and forth through the underworld through a mirror. And this is kind of how one of the, not quite totally finished, but pretty close towards the end production kind of photo of the set. And one thing, Deena, we're trying to figure out, they go back and forth through the mirror, and it's kind of described as like a water almost to kind of emerge in and out of the mirror as this trick. And the script had a very prescriptive kind of laying out of how it was supposed to be done. And we kind of went away from that because Deena at one point, if we could have the mirror dead center and as this kind of main portal back and forth, it would be amazing. And we had this kind of meta idea of like seeing part of the audience in it. And so we went for it, and thank God Buck was able to really figure out a way to do it where we weren't constantly blinding the audience with a mirror dead center on stage, which you don't see very often. But we kind of came this kind of elevator kind of trick where it's this, the doors would open up, there'd be lighting around it, and you kind of would have mist and kind of just see this kind of almost like techno mirrored box in this otherwise relatively domestic setting.
Just brought up a photo from, I think, one of our previews, so you can kind of see how the audience is reflected in there.
And one thing, we want really this wonderful projection surface. So the space became, we want this really kind of very projectable, very clear wall that can both work as windows, and we were very inspired by mid-century moderns kind of clean lines and open window walls that can also be a projection surface.
Great. Let's bring Michael and Buck into the conversation. So Michael, it'd be great to hear, how you started to engage with this world and what your thoughts were.
I got involved because, hold on a second. Yeah, I got involved through DJ because I knew DJ occurs through the deaf community here in LA, and I've gone to various Deaf West shows before. I studied set design and projection design in college, and I haven't really done a lot of theater professionally since college, or for many years since moving to LA. And DJ has always wanted me to work for him because there's not really a lot of deaf designers here in LA. There's not really a lot of deaf perspective on accessibility. And so for this particular situation, it was kind of lined up perfectly schedule-wise, and also, like projecting the subtitles and figuring out how to make the show accessible from like my point of view as a deaf person was helpful because I can kind of see, whether something's working or not. And I think it was helpful to some of the other designers as well to kind of get a sense of, they just ask me like, is this working? Is this not? And that kind of thing. It was kind of, DJ and I were there in the room sometimes help with that. Deena and I talked early on about like concepts of like how to try to go away from just subtitles and bare accessibility, to try to have something that's a little bit more immersive, that doesn't it's actually like integrated into the show. There's not just subtitles plastered on top of something, but something that's actually an experience that a deaf audience member would fully participate in. One thing that really bothers me about accessible theater is it's just a typical show, and then on top of it they add text, and it's not really a workable thing. So Deena came up with a technique that Deaf West has used before, on some other shows, and it's kind of a combination of having deaf performers with hearing actors, and having the hearing actors do the voices for the deaf performers, and you can see both of them on stage at the same time, but the voice actors are kind of off stage and the deaf actors are prominent. And so then from there, we kind of have the discussion of like, well, how much of the show should be accessible to everyone? You know, and I was very strongly of the opinion that, you know, some of the shows should be accessible to hearing audiences and some of it should be accessible to deaf audiences, but not everything all the time for both. If you're like constrained by like, it has to be accessible, has to be clear, has to be understood, then you kind of lose the sort of magic and weirdness of the show. So Deena and I worked together to try to figure out like, when could we sort of eliminate subtitles? When could we sort of just let the strangeness just be what it is and not worry about it being accessible? And so that was kind of my big design, you know, concept that I was bringing to the table. In terms of the actual projection, James and I discussed, you know, using projection surfaces and trying to find a space that would be reserved for subtitles. So, you know, worst case scenario, we always had an area that we could project words that the audience could read, and then, you know, different materials and textures that would be interesting and translucent. And we worked with Buck to figure out, you know, how can we light this in such a way that doesn't wash out the projection, or how can we make, you know, safe zones where, you know, we can still brightly light all the people. And then also, you know, determining like which moments in the play were more important for video or more important for lighting, and just really, you know, in the room discovering like, this is a lighting moment and like, this is a video moment, and just kind of like letting, you know, the different people sort of take over control in those moments. I think it worked out pretty well that way.
And I think something that was really amazing is that no matter how much we planned in the room, things changed. And we would say, you know, I'm thinking of the text message moment. There was a point where, you know, we're like, okay, we have our three lead actors are deaf, and the whole point, you know, the scene when they come back from the underworld is them going through the longest scene in the play without being able to look at each other. And so it was really exciting, just us as a design team, and then once the actors came on, with the actor discussing how do we do this, and at one point we had them having a text fight with one another, and they're arguing with one another via text, which then we're like, oh, okay, it's a video moment, it's projected up there, and then we look and we're like, oh gosh, no, we need more light in here. And then like Buck and Michael and the actors and I are working with creating, okay, how do we create an iPhone on the stage out of these panels, and how do we, you know, the blue text and the green text, and then that's also giving the actors cues on when they start signing or not, because when because we need visual cues throughout, and it happened to be our cue light system wasn't working the way we would have liked, so we went, okay, let's have the design be the cue lights. And so that was really exciting. And I can show a little, I'd like to show a little piece that Michael, or we can kind of describe what's happening in terms of layering of language and image and bodies.
Yeah. So in this moment, we had James had all these different tests of different materials that could be translucent, or different materials that would work for this moment. And it actually works out better than I thought it would, at least. And then Buck was really great at, you know, moving all the lights around and kind of finding the right sweet spot to make this particular moment work. And then this was also like an accessibility moment, where it was like the actors are standing behind it and they're signing, but you can't really see their signing. Then we also had word projected, so it was just kind of a moment that was kind of obscure and not necessarily clear for anyone to understand. But again, I think a huge part of accessibility theater is just to accept that, like, you know, any audience member in any show is never going to understand 100% of the words, especially in a show like this, where even if you can understand the words, they're so dense and so abstract and so wild that, like, you know, you're going to miss things, and that's fine. Just
I think that really was very thematic with the show. A big part of the show is the fact that, you know, main character doesn't really understand or like the world of his wife, and this kind of miscommunication is such a big thematic element of the show that it made total sense. It was very, I thought it worked, kind of get at the heart of the show.
And so what's happening in this scene is Orpheus has just been, I think he's just been ripped to shreds by the Bacchae, and Eurydice, who's in the underworld, comes to help him. And so we have the actors, we have Orpheus right here behind this wall / screen, and Eurydice here. And so what we have, and this starts as the actor's face and then slowly transforms into his memoji, which is also projected on this sculpture right before this happens to show his decapitation. And so what we do is that you can't really see it, this is just a photo I took, but you have the actors behind and they're signing, you have the hearing actors voicing them, and then you also have the text projected. And then Michael, filmed Daniel, our Orphée, and then turned him into a memoji, so all the movements are his. It's not just kind of like a thing Michael made. This is the memoji version of Daniel's face. And then over here we have Natasha, and not signing, but just kind of feeling her character in her hand, and it's a very flowy kind of character. And Natasha's very in touch with herself kind of as a mover. And it was just this really beautiful moment of these people who love each other so much but don't know how to show love to one another, finding each other.
Great. So Buck, it's one of the first questions I probably should have started with is who is the audience that you're creating this piece for, in terms of what does the accessibility need to be, which is what Michael has been talking about, so that oftentimes it's, is it a play for hearing audiences and introducing them to deafness, or is this an audience for the deaf community? And I think sign language plays a role just like any other language that a lot of us are, I think it's a societal question, and then it's also a theatrical question, whether if another language is spoken on stage, does it need to be translated right away? Does everyone need to understand in every moment? Or is it like in our lives where we hear, snippets of something else and may not understand it? But visual cues help us, or we kind of just piece it together over time. So I think it's interesting how you were addressing it with this. And I want to talk about that in terms of the process with the actors. But let me go ahead and turn it over to Buck. And then I want to talk to Lena a little bit about the costumes. And then Howard, we're going to turn it over to you to talk about what the role sound has in this Orpheus and Eurydice world, which is usually pretty prominent. And then specifically within this production, where signing and deafness was also a part of the storytelling.
Yeah, so
about the three of you talk.
Yeah, so I had worked with Deena and James before, so Deena brought me on, and we hit the ground running. Like Michael and James have both said, there were a lot of tricks that had to be done. There was a mirror at center stage. There were white walls that had to be projected on and be seen behind, and a very large cast that needed to be extra visible, because for signed performances, the body and the face are even more important to be visible than in a traditional show. So there were lots of challenges, and then there were all of the various magic tricks that had to happen throughout. There was a moment when the costumes had to change color on stage as written in the script. So that was a me thing to take care of. There was flying that had to happen. There was smoke and atmospherics that had to happen. There were a lot of really exciting challenges. This is probably one of the most challenging shows, if not the most challenging show I've done, which was really, it was great. I don't really want to do work that's not challenging. I don't want to do easy art, whatever easy it is. Like, even technically, if it's easy, then thematically it shouldn't be. Yeah, so, and there was a lot of working right with video and figuring out what light can I cast on the walls when there's someone standing there and also needs to be projected. And yeah, I think we were really successful, actually. I think we had a lot of really beautiful moments, and we were working together really well. I think this team was a really cohesive group, and we never really disagreed. We just were like, okay, let's try this. Okay, that doesn't work. Let's try another thing. Okay, let's just keep trying new things.
Great. Yeah, I think they definitely set you up with a tall order of, from the mirror. So did you all have a traditional, what was your timeline in terms of the tech process? Did you have a little bit of a longer period? Did you have a traditional? Was it super fast?
Super, super, super fast.
Super fast.
Super fast.
Way too fast.
Which is why I think a lot of it changed in the day of. Like Buck had a lot of equipment set up and was able to sort of throw up different looks and play with different things. And then every time Buck came up with something that just looked good, we were like, oh, that's great. Let's just all rally around that. So like the underworld in particular, Buck had created an entire look and feel for it. And I just followed Buck's colors and just whatever style was going for, and sort of the beats and moments that they were creating. It worked out really nicely.
Lena, in terms of, it looks like the world was very contemporary, at least initially, or that's where it sounds like it started, but you also had these interesting other, I don't know if the horse was visually seen or embodied on stage, or what, how you dealt with those things, but also, as Buck was talking about, the bodies of the performers, and visibility of them is something that was probably something that you were taking into mind, considering as you were coming up with the costume science. You want to talk a little bit about your process and what you were thinking about? And I think there might be some images too.
Yes, so that was something that I hadn't dealt with before, that to think about, like, hands always are communication tools in a very specific manner with specific movements that go to the words, and that facial expression is of the utmost importance. And that actually really led the design in a lot of ways that were exciting. So this was a very contemporary world, but in that it was a surreal world. And as James spoke about, there was this layering of where exactly in time are we, right? There was Eurydice, who kind of felt like she stepped out of a Greek vase, who was talking to her husband, Orpheus, who was in a hoodie and t-shirt, which is both two things mashing against each other, but also happens in our real contemporary life right now. Women will wear a Greek-inspired thing when men are in a hoodie and t-shirt. Then there were the surreal moments of the horse, and we did one with the postman. So if Deena could pull up some images. The horse, and actually you saw a little bit of this also with the head, we were inspired by the worlds of the digital. So this idea of emojis and being emojis, and I was really captivated with Snapchat, and how do we take our faces and merge them with Snapchat filters? And this is a part of how we see ourselves in everyday life, but it's also totally surreal. So this was what we came up on for the horse. You can see that we got very inspired by unicorn emoji. We wanted the horse to be really happy and a little bit snarky and a little bit like too much.
Yeah, it's amazing. I have to say, all of these everything sounds amazing, but I think if too much was your goal, you got there. Yeah.
Because the horse is specifically this embodiment of where can we get our inspiration from as artists. And it's tantalizing. It's this like, oh, we want to get there and we see it and it's happening. And if someone could just give it to us, that would be so great. But in the end, it's kind of a farce and you just have to put the work in, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that combined with the idea of us all being distracted by screens and living in our emoji world as much as we live in our real world. And with this actor in particular, wanting to have his facial expressions so strongly and let him use his body to express everything that he's expressing came to this costume. Another one that we have here, oh, so this is that photo again in just the set, so you can see kind of the whole thing. All right, so the next. This is to show just two different versions of the world. So the first photo that we just went by was this one, is the more contemporary world, but there's Eurydice in her like elegant, completely contemporary, but also completely and dress. We have our Urtebe's character, who is an angel that we don't know is an angel, a working person, and enters into this world with a little bit of a wink, but we don't know that they are an angel. And so our color palette is to kind of reference that a little bit. Contrast this with, this is the world of death, and this is actually the character of Dead Center, and her two helpers. And this whole thing was such a collaboration between all of the departments, with the costumes being that really intense neon and the lighting being the really intense purple, and the beautiful way that the super titles made it feel like we were looking at a comic book or something. That was its own world. And they come out of the mirror, so you can see the mirror open there. Death is in a metallic that reminds us of the mirror, so it's almost like Death is wearing the mirror that she comes out of. And then for the next images, it's the postman character. This is the postman in process, but the postman was this full body 3-person costume. If you go 2 more, Deena, where they moved as one, and this really came from watching them in rehearsal, seeing how they moved and thinking about like, how can I make this into one piece that is enhancing their movement and that makes it feel in that surreal way like there's multiple body parts and there's just too much to handle in a weird sense. So it was this 3-person costume where there's these multiple legs and one face and then 3 heads on top of that face. And the one before this is the inspiration of a real Japanese postman. And I loved his look, and that brought me into how to make that surreal. And then the one before that is the costume in process with just 2 of the 3 actors.
It's so stunning, as always your costume design is. But let's turn Howard. We'd love to hear a little bit about what your process was and the conversations you and Deena had.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think with Deena, it's like, I always love working with Deena. It really, she's like fearless, and I love Deaf West. And so it was just like, hearing that I get to work with both of these entities, Deena being a person, not just an entity, really was like super exciting. The thing though with it is like, when you do a show for a deaf or hard of hearing audience, sound is not necessarily the first thing that that is the highest priority, because it's not a sense that they're going to prioritize. So I had to figure out a way of making the sound accessible and inclusive. So I went into research mode, like how do I do that? And one of the first things I did was I went to a panel discussion about Eurydice, which is the Sarah Rule opera. And she was there, and they had like a question and answer. And I asked a question of Sarah Rule, and she told me about this composer who is deaf and, you know, gave all these like TED Talks or whatever. So we tracked him down. His name is J. Allen Zimmerman, and kind of just like gave me, I wrote him an email, and then he emailed me back with just like a crash course in like, how does music and sound interact with a deaf or hard of hearing audience? And from there, it was like, okay, like I knew that I had to match the sound with a visual, because you know that's gonna bring out the sound. Is just having a strong visual, and obviously with these other designers, it was very easy to just have great visuals to work with. And then the other aspect was DJ Kurz wanted a subwoofer. And I mean, this is an idea that I've used in the past too, is having a subwoofer under the seats so that the audience is literally being kind of like vibrated and, you know, jolted throughout the performance. And, but the whole time I didn't know if the theater that we were working in had a subwoofer. So finally, when we did a site visit, I realized, no, they don't. So I had to go find a subwoofer. And once I did, I was like, well, how am I going to stick this in the theater? Well, it turns out they have this storage closet where there's like a tiny little hole in the back of the storage closet that goes under the seats of the theater that we were in. And but they don't let people go into that storage closet. And I was just like, well, if we can't get into that storage closet, we can't have the subwoofer, then DJ is going to be really mad, and like, what's the point of this? What's the point of sound at all in this show? So so eventually, yes, we did get the permission, and you know, I had to find the right subwoofer to fit into the hole that was in the storage closet. And I remember the moment where, you know, during tech, when I was just like testing out the subwoofer, like finally it works after running the cables and everything. And DJ felt like a bass thing shake. And he texted me. He didn't have an interpreter with him, so he texted me. He said, "That felt great." And I was like, oh my God, like, thank God that he likes it. And so from then on, it was all about how do I create sound that, you know, activates that subwoofer. So everything had to be like low frequency. And in fact, my main focus, which, you know, Deena was very generous with, was that scene with Death and the two helpers. It was entirely conceived by Deena as almost like a dance techno thing. And I've never seen this happen with a director where they literally said, here's an entire scene that's going to be underscored by you, and we're going to rehearse it as if there's underscoring, but you're going to go out and create it. It was like, it was kind of terrifying, because I'm like, oh, what if what I do, it doesn't work for this? But, you know, through many rehearsals of just like watching their movements, we figured out a BPM, you know, so that they would all kind of like know generally how fast to go. And just seeing the costumes, the movement, I was like, this is kind of like a Prince, Daft Punk kind of thing for some reason. That's what I was feeling, synthwave. And I just went with it. And I'm like super proud of what we were able to produce, but like, I feel like 90% of my efforts were concentrated in this one scene 6, that ended up being this like crazy dance music video thing that, you know, Deena basically gifted to me as a sound designer. So I'm very appreciative of that.
Great. Howard, did you have something you wanted to play for us?
Oh yeah, I have on the Dropbox some music from that. It's about 40 seconds long, I think.
I'm going to actually use that as a I want to first say that, your production sounds hypnotic. I want to thank you all for joining us. We'll play the music as we kind of head our way out of the conversation. But I want to highlight, it's so glad to have that you were able to share the work you did. If folks want to talk about this further, do all of you have websites or social media? Great. So, okay. So Michael, maybe if folks want to reach out to you, they can do that through Deena. Great. So I want to again thank you all. I'm so sad that this couldn't be shared, or I wanted to be there to see this. But it sounds like an amazing adventure and collaboration, and we want to thank you all for being here and sharing that. So Deena, if you want to play, Howard, this is something you composed, or if you want to just let us know what we're listening to.
Yeah, I composed it. I composed it entirely for this one scene. Scene 6, and it's a short snippet of it. It's really a longer piece, but it's a piece where they're kind of like taking Eurydice's soul down to hell with them, and then they dance about it. So yeah.
And then they dance about it. I love that. Is this the one EWP Orphée?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll play that. And also, I wanted to add one more thing, just from everyone sharing and just remembering of something that I really loved about this process is that I don't feel at any point we decided there was never a separation between accessibility and artistic excellence. It was literally every single step of the way. It just was what it was. Like everything was incorporated. It was accessibility is artistic excellence, and I feel like 100% we were all just on board with that the entire time. And because when it came down to it, like in this strange play, and I think we even to the point of us knowing that we were starting in LA and moving to Japan, it was never like, oh, we'll figure this out for then the Japan production. It was what like contemporary and mid-century like Japanese art and artists can we be looking at? Can we how are we thinking about language in general, about how the super titles are coming in? How do we center that? And so I think from the beginning we were thinking of all of our audience members from the get-go, and I think it created a really beautiful, strange piece. And on that note.
Just one, I think a big reason why that worked as well is like in rehearsal, there's deaf actors and they were contributing their perspective as deaf performer. DJ sat in a lot of the rehearsals and he had his perspective as a deaf director. I was in all of the design meetings and I had my perspective at first. So it's just like, while everyone was considering that and was very appreciative, was also because there was always a deaf person in the room the entire time contributing. Mm-hmm. And I really think that really helped a lot.
Absolutely, and I'm proud of it with our cast. It was important that we wanted diversity in all sense of the word, and so we were 50% POC and we were 50% deaf, and we went into it with that just had to be the way it was, and we were primarily also in terms of cast women identifying, even though that is not necessarily in the play. But exactly, I think this was just such an example of how important it is for people to be in the room and for the people it's about to be in the room from the get-go. And on that note, okay.
Here it is. Wait, takes a while to load. All right, here we go. Here.
Yes,
All right.
thank you, Howard. I feel like now that should be our new tradition. We should dance everyone off. It was so great to see you all moving.
Oh my God, I'm
So,
gonna cry.
thank you all again so much for coming here and sharing your beautiful vision and production of JEAN COCTEAU'S ORPHÉE. And we look forward to hearing from you all very soon again. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for having
Thank
us.
you.
This
Thank
was
you
such
so
a
much.
wonderful thing to do.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank
Lauren.
you.
Of course. I want to thank director Deena Selenow and the designers on Deaf West's production of JEAN COCTEAU'S ORPHÉE for joining us today and for sharing their work and giving us a little bit of insight into their process. Now we're going to switch to 3 playwrights who have all had productions at East West Players over the last few years. Lauren Yee, Leah Nanako Winkler, and Susan Stanton. And we're gonna catch up with them in a conversation led by Amrita Ramanan, who is the director of Literary Development at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So Amrita, I turn things over to you. All right.
Great, thank you so much, Snehal.
Thank you all.
Bye. I am so excited to be here. I feel like as a director of literary development, the real title of my job should be fangirl of Playwrights, because I just get to love on Playwrights, right? I mean, that's really what it is. And what's so incredible about this conversation is, Leah, Susan, Lauren, you were all playwrights that I absolutely love. I remember just the moments that I've been able to intersect with your work. As Snehal mentioned, Susan, you were part of the API 2x2 program that we had at the Black Swan Lab. And while I wasn't there at OSF at the time when you were part of the lab, I got to know you since then. And it's been beautiful just to witness your work and stay connected. And then Leah, I remember meeting you at the Kata conference that OSF hosted in 2016 and hearing such a good reading of 2 Mile Hollow and just being like, this writer, my goodness. And it's been so beautiful to witness your work ever since. And Lauren, I have been following your work for years and years and years. And then last season, we finally got to collaborate together with a production of Cambodian Rock Band, as well as workshopping some of your other plays. So I'm just so thrilled that all of you are here. I know that you're all part of the East West family. Leah, I know, your productions of God Said This in Kentucky were part of East West. Susan, you've had your play Takarazuka as part of, East West. And then Lauren, I know Great Leap was produced at East West Players. So it's really wonderful that, our collective artistic families could join for this conversation. So hooray, it's so great to see you. I just wanted to start with, kind of inspired by what Snehal was saying, where are each of you right now physically? Where is your home right now? Where are you talking to us from?
So my home is the same home I've lived in before the pandemic. So I'm in my apartment in New York, and I am sitting in the one corner where I can kind of be positioned, and my husband can actually walk through the apartment. So
that's a good corner.
Yeah.
Nice choice.
Susan and I are in Millbrook, New York, which is 2 hours upstate by Metro North from the city. And you might be thinking oh my God, why are these 2 people together? Do they even know each other? Susan and I are really good friends. We have been for years, and sorry, my cat is acting bananas for the last 5 minutes, and I've been trying to shake her out. But basically, she came up here to quarantine with me, and we've been together now for weeks. And we haven't, it's been amazing.
Yeah. I do love that the 2 of you are quarantining together. I think that's so beautiful. That's awesome. It's making me wish that I'm oh man, my artist friends that I should have quarantined with at this moment, but you are forward thinking. That's good.
Anyway, so.
And it actually it's helped me write, because I think it's just very difficult to write right now, and we'll kind of almost have our work days where I feel we'll take either end of the table and we'll just write till lunch and then write afterwards. So the structure of it actually has been really inspiring.
Oh, that's so great to hear. Yeah, I mean, something that I was wondering just from each of you is, in this really surreal moment that we find ourselves in, as writers, I'm curious just about, your process right now and what you have drawn inspiration from. What have been the ways in which you found yourself, feeling motivated or excited about your artistry? And also, what are the moments where you've been like, what, part of my process right now is to hang out with my cat, or to do something that doesn't involve me being engaged with my writing, but supports me as a human being?
I mean, I think it's been a real challenge. I was in a TV writer's room, which has its own schedule, and then I kind of had to come back somewhat abruptly. And I think it's been a real up and down for everybody. I think initially I was just doing the writing I had to, deadline wise, and it was like much easier to edit than to generate. And I've done some reading, I've done some journaling. I don't think I've done anything of real substance yet. I think I've released myself from the pressure of like chronicling this. It's like, no, it's just about getting through day to day. I will say that I've been really drawn to very characterful stories in terms of like what I'm drawn to writing and reading and thinking about, like just things that are more intimate. I think when it's like, there's a big spy thriller and it's like, this person's doing this, I'm like, yeah, I mean, like everything, like the scale of everything has been so thrown off that I just want like really intimate stories in a way.
Oh, yeah.
I think for me, I had just gotten, like February 29th, I flew back to New York after working for 9 months on a medical procedural, and it was really fun. Like, it was a great job, but I was really like purposely taking this year to work on 5 projects that I really wanted to work on, in both theater and in the film realm. So I had already been planning on taking the year to work on those things. So like, I've been looking forward to this time. Not this time, but like I've been looking forward to like I've been looking forward to like having like writing from home and writing like what I want to. So I think I'm still working off of that kind of delirious high. And then I'm also a person who's very type A and very, very thrives off of self-made like structure and terrible self-inflicted deadlines. So right now I'm maniacally following my own like structure, and like that's just been keeping me going to numb out all of my fear and anxiety about the world. So I've been writing everything I can, and everything that I've wanted, and putting way too much pressure on myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something amazing about what you spoke to in regards to the opportunity, but also what it means to find that opportunity within a structure. And I think that, I mean, I absolutely, as someone who is not a writer, but loves writers and also is finding my path in this time, the structure has been interestingly supportive.
I think in certain ways it's a little different for me. I think one, just like logistically, and then the other is just kind of like how my pandemic brain happens to be responding. And I think like the first part, which I'm sure like a lot of people who are parents or caretakers are dealing with, is just the challenge of providing like full-time childcare. That like between my husband and I, we have a 17-month-old, and it's literally from the moment she wakes up to the moment she goes to sleep, it's 12 hours. And she's a great baby, but the question is, what do you do with this baby for 12 hours when you have 2 parents who, have work? So it's been very kind of tightly scheduled. Like I think we're a pretty big contrast maybe to some of the other friends that I have that are, the things that they do aren't there anymore. And so it's about like filling time. Whereas we're like, I have 5 minutes. I'm going to go work before I have to switch over and take care of the baby. So it's just like a different challenge. And in, I think some ways it helps to have something to fill your time, that it's like, whether or not you want to wake up at 8, you have to, because there's another human who's like I have needs and you have to do it. So that in that way, I think that gives my days shape. And then I think on kind of how my brain has responded in times of pandemic, I guess like I've set the bar very low for myself. That like usually I think I'm also someone who's like, there are deadlines and be productive. But I think I'm like, if we all survive till next year, very happy, mission accomplished.
Right.
So, and I think especially as someone who's just done a lot of theater recently, and having, it's very strange because there's the machine of what like season planning and putting up the season and planning the next season after that is, that I was like, oh, I think it's like, I read a study, like it's hard for us to concentrate right now because like this pandemic has caused our like short-term instincts to kick in, that in a way we have to concentrate on the near, like the short-term things instead of, you know, doing our like long-term planning, because that's not, the long-term plans aren't there anymore. So yeah.
Thank you for speaking to the experience of a parent and what that's like in this moment. So as we're continuing, you know, I'm really curious because I know each of you, but admittedly, you know, there's so much more that I want to learn from each of you. So I'm going to be a little selfish here in terms of my own inquiry of wanting to have that. And also, you know, I've just found during this moment of quarantine, it's been a good moment to reflect on, you know, journeys, you know, where we came from, where we started, and where we are now. So I'm gonna take us back and then take us forward again, but not do it as seamlessly as all of you do in your plays. So I apologize for the messiness of my structure. But I'm gonna just, you know, I'd love to actually just go back to just the moment of, when did you each know that you were a writer and this was the path that you wanted to pursue?
I was really young. I think I was like 7.
Oh.
The first thing I wanted to be when I was a little girl was a bus driver, because the buses in Japan are really cool. And like they wear like really cool uniforms, and they, you know, like me and my mom took the bus a lot. So like that's what I like started saying. And then I remember I started saying I wanted to be a writer because we had to write these personal essays in Japanese school, where at the end of the year they make like every single student in the entire school write a personal essay about something that was like important to them. And I guess I must have been in the first grade or something. So I don't know how old that is, but I wrote one, and I wasn't like very good at school, but I remember like my teacher being like telling my mom that my essay was really good, and everybody thought that like my essay was good. And they were like, Leah's like good at something. and because I was biracial too, like they didn't think I could write in Japanese. And so I think I really latched onto that. And ever since that, I just like blindly would be like, yeah, I want to be a writer when I grew up. It never changed.
Not as early as that, but I think relatively early. I mean, I loved theater, but I was terrible at acting, and but I was kind of just like theater adjacent kind of. And I took a playwriting class taught by Dan Callan at the Honolulu Theater for Youth, and it was just really like amazing program, especially for Hawaii. And it was, you could write like a play, and if it could be produced. So they had a slot in their season to produce like a series of like one act and short plays by high school students. And so I learned how to be a playwright then. And I think everything kind of clicked for me, because I had been sort of writing short stories, but they'd all been around people and dialogue heavy. I was drawing, and it was all faces. And something about the study of characters just really, I don't know, it kind of put all the different things I was interested in, and, you know, spaces and images, like it kind of like put it all together for me. And so I wrote a play through that program, and then applied to NYU dramatic writing, and I really abruptly, I was like 17, I had never really seen snow before, and I just wrote a play and submitted it, got in, and then just really like obliviously, like naively went to New York, and it was really fun, but also a total disaster and a really difficult process to acclimate to New York City. Like, I lost all of my textbook money playing 3-card Monte in like 2 minutes. Like, it was just a series of bad things.
Wow.
Very gamble, kind of by accident.
For me, I think it was like similar to Leah, that that it's just one of those like intuitive things that you're just like, this is what I'm drawn to. This is what's fun. I think, I don't remember this, but my mother claims that I guess like maybe when I was like 3 or 4, when I was beginning to like, when I knew how to write letters, but not words yet, like I somehow like wrote a story that I think like it was, it's sort of like Once Upon a Time, but I like abbreviated all the words. So it was like an but somehow I was like constructing narrative back then. So I think it was just one of those things that you're just like, what do you like to do? And I'm like, I like writing stories. And kind of has just continued on ever since. I think maybe the difference between like wanting to do something and where I am right now is, I think even when I was little, like in first grade, I knew it was something that people did not do for a living. I knew it was something that you did on the side, and that you had, like a real job that paid bills, even as like a very small child. So I think like my young self would be surprised that this is my only job.
When I was doing theater, even, I didn't consider like, I knew the writing, I knew that somebody wrote it, but it didn't really click in my head that there were like playwrights out there, and that like you could talk to them, and that like it would have blown my mind that I was like talking to like 2 other playwrights right now, and then there was a whole like person who supported playwrights for a living, like, like, amazing.
I think I knew that there were things called playwrights, but I figured all the plays had been written, because like at school, like the only plays that you got were like Shakespeare and like an Arthur Miller. So you're like, well, all the plays are out there.
Yeah, it
like,
felt like for
yeah,
sort of like older white dead men. It definitely, and like especially in Hawaii, I mean, I knew that there were playwrights, but yeah, everything felt, and like I think that's why like London and New York loomed really large in my imagination, and the thought of like, because there's programs now where it's like you read all these contemporary playwrights and you can talk with them, and like I just didn't even know about that at all.
Susan, I want to pick up on something that you mentioned earlier and bring it out to the whole group as a question. So as you were all finding yourselves in playwriting and developing your process, what were some of the opportunities, programs, and mentors early on that you found really supportive and helpful?
Yeah, well, I have to say they were all proud members of my lab, and I think there's like amazing groups, like I mean in New York and everywhere, like developmental groups where like playwrights can find safe homes and write together and like be accountable for each other. I think especially when you don't have an upcoming production, or there's a sense of like who needs these pages, or like why am I doing this, and to be like, well, I don't know, but on Thursday I'm going to bring in like 20 pages and that's going to be something. I find really helpful. I mean, I've done a bunch of writing programs or like undergrad and grad school. And so like Paula Vogel has been an amazing teacher for me. But there's also just been like friends and other sort of people like David Henry Wong, or people that are mentors, but also friends, and who really send the elevator down in their sort of like mentorship and just support for like writers finding their way and like developing their voices.
Beautiful.
When I moved to New York in 2006, and I literally like I was like the person on the bus with like a suitcase and a dream after I like sold my eggs for money to pay for an apartment. And the first thing I did was blind email young Jean Lee. And I asked her if I could be her assistant. And I worked with her for 2 years, and she mentored me, and I think through her model, I decided to try to self-produce my own plays. And I did that until like 4 years ago. And I didn't like, because I had, I'm sorry, not 4 years ago. God, time flies. Till like 2012. What is that? Almost 10 years ago? 13, 14, 15.
Oh yeah,
8.
so about 8 years ago. Oh
Oh,
wow. Yeah.
There was like one play I self-produced in 2016 after I got produced by somebody else because I was like afraid that it was never going to happen again. I was really supported through residencies that in New York that favored theater companies who are self-producing original work. That a lot of them don't exist anymore, but I remember getting support from the Ontological Hysteric Theater, where I think, Lauren, you had a show back in the day.
Oh, did I?
I don't know.
Maybe.
Maybe not. But I knew of you
Possible.
back then. I knew of you back then. And like the Brick Theater, Dixon Place, like all those downtown venues. And then when I started, the first writers group I've ever gotten into was this now defunct writers group called Terra Nova Collective, who was really amazing. And then I got into Youngblood at Ensemble Studio Theater, and they were very instrumental in letting me just be a playwright instead of a producer and a director. So, and playwright. So like they were really awesome. And of course, Yee. And as I moved to actually like being produced by other people, which actually didn't happen until 2016, East West Players was pretty instrumental in producing Kentucky in its second production. And after that happened, I think like, you know, it like one door opens like a bunch of other doors. So like that's why I got to go to OSF, and you know, it was like I think I had like a different trajectory than some playwrights, just because I started out self-producing. But yeah, whenever anybody asked me like who my like mentor was, it was definitely Young Jean.
I remember really like not knowing how a playwright should be in the room. Like, when can you talk? Like, when do you push back? Like, when do you defend? Like, how do you advocate for your play in the rehearsal process? Because you're not always right. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes the director might have a clearer sense, but how do you figure that out? And so I was an assistant director a bunch of times, just to like watch on like always new plays, or I would sit in a lot of like round tables at the Lark and then just sort of like watch how playwright and directors talk to each other, because I just didn't, I had so few productions that I just had no idea how that worked. And I was so nervous myself that I just like watch them like, you know, communicating.
That's really smart.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I like to what Lauren said, like the great thing about being a playwright is that there are groups and that you can read each other's work out loud without the presence of actors or directors. Like, it's a complete safe space. And like, I do think, you know, playwriting is ultimately like a competitive art form in the sense that, you know, there's not that many slots and such little money, but for the most part, and I mean, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I feel like we probably get along better than a lot of like the theater, like there's more rivalry, but there's less like personal rivalry, because we like look at me and Susan, I don't know, I feel like we're all kind of through these groups like are in a small part a part of each other's work. Like, I've learned so much just by being in like groups with other writers.
It's like you get to like be in a circle, and even if you're not bringing pages, you get to be like, this is how my week was.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's nice.
Also because I think like no one does theater for the money, or like most people I know don't. There's a sense of like we're all in it for like the passion and the love of it. And so there's a sense of like you should support everyone's endeavor, because theater is so hard, and you have to be kind of crazy to want to do it and like support other people in all the ways you can while trying to like do it yourself, you know?
So there is something I think really meaningful about what it means for a group to have that form of collective humanity and understanding that I definitely feel leads to a point of advocacy. I mean, in the way in which I see writers really root for each other. that's kind of beautiful. And I see how that also, I think, interestingly can translate, which is going to be another one of my questions, because all of you are also writing for television too. Like, you know, I'm so curious about the translation from the writers groups you've experienced in theater and then also in TV.
So I have a good metaphor for this. Because I think, like, before I went into TV rooms, I was asking people, I was like, what is this? What goes on? Like, I didn't understand what you actually did. And I think, like, the best analogy that I've come up with, just based on the rooms I've been in, is that you're an actor in a new play development process. That there's someone who has this idea they're trying to work through, and they have maybe some pages, and they have instincts, and they know the characters better than you do. And once whatever allotment of time is gone, they will still be working on this, and you may not be. And you're only, and your job, at least like when I have new play development workshops, I'm always like, just tell me everything. And some of it, I may think that's a great idea. And some of it I'm not going to use. I'm going to treat your ideas like my own ideas, that I kind of take a bunch in, and I'm like, okay, most of this we won't use, we'll use that one. And so that, you know, and the best actors in those type of processes tend to be people who are like, okay, today you've brought in pages, and we're now underwater, and I'm just going to run with it. And the actors that are harder to work with are like, I liked it better when we were on the moon, and I would really like to talk about it. And you're like, no, we're underwater now. You got to run with it. Like, you kind of, as a writer, you kind of leave offerings on the altar, and you know, the ideas are like everyone else's. They get picked, they don't get picked.
Yeah, it's like you don't want to be the person in the room who has a criticism without a solution. Like Lauren said, it's like you get hired not to be the most egotistical person in the room, you know, you're not hired and you like show your brilliance or anything like that. You're all just there to help one writer or a couple of writers execute their vision the best that they can, or to enhance it. So I think the main difference for me in playwriting and TV writing, unless I'm writing my own pilot, is that like in playwriting, you own everything. Everything is your idea. Ultimately, if it sucks, you're the one who's going to get all the blame. In a writer's room, you don't like you own it, but in a different way. Like, you're proud of the show if you like the show and you're proud of it, but like ultimately, like, you're a person in the room who's just hired to help the writer, and you also happen to be a writer.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing is, because when you're giving feedback, it's very much like that. Like, it's like a writer's room where you're all kind of like giving feedback. But when you write the scripts, instead of trying to write in different characters' voices, you're also trying to write in kind of like the voice of the showrunner. So it's almost like an extra layer. And I think about that. I think the essay by Eleanor Fugue like plays as planets, and so part of it's like, what is this planet that we're like spinning on all these episodes for, and like what are the rules? And so it's just I don't know, it's very interesting to try to write in someone else's voice. Like, I never did it before, but you know, there's like a cadence, and it's just different. And like, at least for Succession, it's a very male show in a lot of ways, and they speak differently, and it's like the business school I'd never thought I would go to. So it's like it's just it feels very like different from myself, but then I try to bring like as much as myself into it, and everything gets kind of like you know, like we all like put our own personal things into it as well, into like the stew of it. So yeah.
Well, it's like most of the time you're hired for a specific reason. Like I've been like in one room I was like the religious person. And in another room I was like the working class person with like a working class background and perspective, and can, you know, talk about that. And then in another room I was this show, actually things like this happen where you could be hired on the show, it could like just completely get canceled before you start production. And that happened to me once. Just it was a really fun show, but you know, like week week 7, right before we were supposed to premiere. They're like, "Oh, it's not happening anymore. Bye."
Oh.
You can use the office though.
Oh.
And like, but I was hired on that show as on-screen correspondent talent and like a late night show like joke writer because, quote, I seemed like a normal person. I don't know. Like,
Okay, I'm so curious. So someone directly told you that you seem
Yeah,
like a normal person, and that's how you were hired? Wow.
yeah, well, like it's like at least for like the on-camera portion because I'm not a performer. So I was just like, I don't know if I can do. I don't know if I can like talk like be normal on camera. Like I'm not an actor. Like, and they were like, no, it's because you are normal. And like everybody else is like really skinny and like TV actors and there's just like TV is just so unexpected and like there are no rules. Anything can happen.
With plays, you may never know when it's produced, but you do have that control, and you do also have that generative process, you know, that possibility of self-producing. But with a TV show, once it's canceled, how much of that is just out of your control? You know, I think that's really interesting in terms of ownership and identity of that ownership with the work and with the artistry. So something that I'm really curious about is when you come into a job with this knowledge of I'm going to fill this type of role or I'm going to be this person, what is your own personal negotiation with that in terms of filling that role? But also, I mean, I look at the three of you and I know all three of you to be just like such incredible multifaceted individuals. So does that kind of get put in the realm of your playwriting, or what are the moments when you're writing for TV where you negotiate the expectations with your own personal desire or reality?
Well, again, I will speak on this just because I brought it up, and I think that maybe I was like speaking in a blanket way where it was specific for me. Like I have noticed that, you know, I personally am usually hired for a reason, and sometimes they tell you, i.e., the normal person things, and sometimes just things you pick up on. You know, like it's just kind of like, you know, like I was on a show where I was the only person who grew up without health insurance. So everything, and it was set in a public hospital. So like I naturally had things to say about patients who might go, you know, get care at the facility. And then you kind of notice things within other people, like what their superpower is in the room. And it's not much personal negotiation other than the fact that, like, you know, like and this isn't just one show, it's just like in general, like I get tired of speaking about specific things. Like I'm sure all of us get a little tired sometimes of having to speak about diversity when when all we want to do is like kind of create work, but when we're asked, you kind of feel a personal responsibility, or like you kind of negotiate with yourself as like, you know what, like I'm not going to answer this question today. So it's kind of like the same thing.
I think that when I first started the room, I was just so terrified because you know, again, it was like so many years of doing theater and rooms, and like I came in at zero. Like there was, you know, I hadn't been like a writer's assistant. Like some people are in rooms before they're writers in rooms, and so, and like I think I called up Carla Ching in just a blind panic, and she really like beautifully walked me through some of the process, and like you don't have to talk as much as everybody else. Like it's okay, and just various things. And when I started, it was like there were always really funny writers, like British comedy writers who were just so brilliant. And I remember like going home and like, I gotta like pre-write some jokes, or like, I'll never be as funny or clever as them. And then they're like, but that's not what your superpower is. Like, I'm coming in with my point of view, and like, I know New York, or I'm a playwright, so I'm leading from character. And so it's just like, if we were all the same, we wouldn't be a good room, because it is about people coming in from their different life experiences. You want like-minded people, but not like same brain, and you need people to sometimes resist an idea and sometimes to like dive in, not to say like to shut something down, but you know, just to kind of like find different entry points and make it more than what the show runner could do just on their own.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing. Like it's how I would precisely structure a room if I had one. Like I would want, you know, one of Susan, and then like one of Lauren, and like, you know, and one of you. Like it's just like I would want different people, because like you're not going to make a good show if it's like clones of yourself.
Right, right. Yeah, and I really appreciate that in terms of what both of you are speaking to around the, and I'll admit similarly, I mean, constantly talking about diversity as a thing, but what it means to actually have the, the intention of the curatorial process and the value of that being representative, so that there can be a way in which the conversations can flow to, everyone being able to speak to their personal experiences and their style, and have that be a collective and a nice variance of collective in that experience.
I will also say, Carla Ching talked me through it too. When I was like, I'm going over here. I have no idea what's going on. And I think she was like, I have something. Don't worry.
All right, yeah. Carla Ching.
I feel like it is that thing what was described as like sending the elevator back down.
I just wanted to end with the question where, we started just talking about where you are in process right now in this moment of quarantine with the pandemic, and to kind of take us full circle to that, I'm curious about what are you thinking about in terms of theater post-pandemic, whenever that happens? What do you imagine theater will be like?
Is the vaccine here? Have we all taken the vaccine?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna do the hypothetical, but I'm imagining that we're in vaccine land. Yeah.
Okay. Things are much better. People are not having to attend theater at like 1/3 the capacity, which is great. I don't know. I hope people will be thinking a lot about like economic inequality in class. Like to me, kind of the fact that like Parasite won the Oscar before we tumbled into this, I think to me says something about where our like subconscious is.
I feel like maybe just having theater and so many experiences, I think to what you're saying, Lauren, like having certain things taken away, it makes everything else so much more essential, where it's it's complicated because obviously I don't run a theater, and so there's certain choices that you need to do economically, but I feel like it's like post COVID, I just feel like it's like a time for like theater, like the present moment, and like essential stories and just stuff that you're really passionate to like make and produce. And just, like I feel like the really safe revivals, it's like, do we need that right now? Like that doesn't feel like the kind of thing that wants to come out after this time.
I honestly, I have no idea. I'm so scared. It's like I feel like I'm probably, I don't know, like I've had like a couple things canceled, but like I feel like theater might go back to grassroots movement, where it, like in New York maybe, where a lot, because I feel like a lot of the trickle effect of COVID is just so sad in terms of new plays and things that were coming up the pipeline that is just going to be pushed back now. So I think a lot of people who can't, like who don't want to wait like 5 or 6 years to be produced by somebody else might start doing it on their own.
Lauren, Leah, and Susan, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. And it's just so beautiful to see your faces and know that you're healthy and safe and, finding some great quarantine. Yeah.
Thank you so much for all of your advocacy and hard work. And you do. It's so important.
Oh,
in this household.
I love all of you, and I'm going to continue to fight for you in every way that I can. Yeah, so I'm going to turn it back. Oh, Kitty! Hey! It's a good ending to this. And I'm going to turn it back to Snehal.
I want to thank all of the artists for joining us today on our East-West Wednesdays. It was great to get insight into so many different productions and to touch base with East-West Players regulars. We hope you will join us next week for our next East-West Wednesday. And again, you will save the date for our virtual gala on Sunday, May 31st. Please, everyone, be safe and well. Thank you.